3 test cases, and this one does involve console input. So I'm going to click Run Tests here, and if you can see it, it actually passes all of them. And in the results screen, we don't have any garbage at all, which is the way the Replit is supposed to work for you guys, and it hasn't been. What's important here is this little message. Notice this message up here. Any Replit that you open that have this green message about how they're changing the testing seem to be working right. And I don't know how they're updating them, you know, if they're just doing it randomly here and there. But if you see that message, that seems to be the fix has been found. Now, yesterday, that link was no good. Yeah, it still doesn't take me anywhere. The link that says read more here, it's just a fairy tale. But they know that we need this really badly, and I know that they're trying really, really hard. So I apologize. Be patient with it, and it's garbage. Brad mentioned up here too that earlier before you guys got here, if you haven't messed with Visual Studio at all, it's pretty easy to use and pretty helpful. We'll start using it after our first unit exam so that you get a little bit of experience with it. It can help you a little bit more than the Replit does as far as giving you help. So good things and bad things about that, but you definitely can be looking at running things in Visual Studio or in Visual Studio Code if the Replit is making you unsure because of the stupid garbage problem. We are in a field like this. If I didn't mention it to you last time, I'll mention it this time. A job I had once, I had an open problem with a software company for like 2 or 3 years. It was a great big deal. It caused us a lot of problems. They weren't able to fix it. We had to deal with it for all that time. I had management, you know, very concerned, wanting to know how come I didn't have it fixed. And I was like, it's the software company, you know, it's not anything we can do. And we get in that kind of position, just like this, you know, where I would fix it for you if I could, but it's not mine to fix. So we were looking at methods last time, and we had created our own Replit, and we were looking at creating methods. We've done a little bit, and I want to look at chapter 4 in our textbook. And notice in our textbook, even the name of the chapter, they say writing, debugging, and testing functions. And one of the first things I said is a function in C# is called a method. So you will see that kind of, you know, multiple terms for the same thing for sure. Now, they do have some nice debugging information here for us. Putting some code in with a deliberate bug. And we'll be able to do that better if we're using Visual Studio. So I'd like to do a little bit of different practice and exploring today, kind of on our own. Let's go to Replit. Oh, before we do, I'm sorry. I got a lot of questions about this one in our repetition. Let me go back to that one. Keep moving this off the screen, sorry.
I didn't have a lot of issues changing like variable, like with a maybe an integer or a double on it. I can't figure out how to change it to a currency.
Yeah, I had a.
Yeah, I had to either put like let's either print a $sign right next to it so it looks like currency. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's a good way around it, but I know like C has.
The colon C didn't work.
No, I would do like the one where you can put the index numbers like in a string, you know, and then do the things last.
Mm-hmm.
You could do like the whatever variable you're gonna replace that 0 with, colon C, and it still put like a weird symbol instead of $.
I found that too. I think
Did you-
Replit has a different currency than
Yeah.
US currency.
Yeah.
So one of our early replets should have covered that. Let's take a look. It should be in this variables and console input one. Where we have formatting output. And right here in 2-4, using the locale for formatting output, this is the one that you want to copy some code from. So it shows us how to do that. We have some using statements that are required. We have to say that we're going to use system.globalization and system.threading. And then we have to use this line of code here to set our current culture equal to US English. And then when we do that, the replit virtual machine should be able to handle that properly. I'm going to change this to put the, let me run it first. So that problem comes and goes with replit. So if it wasn't happening when you guys went through this one, it's kind of hard to understand what this one is showing you. And it's if you notice, the messages here are different, right? Last time when we were here on Monday, we were seeing those .NET messages to run code, and it was taking forever, right? Well, the replit people have converted to a different compiler. They're using the Mono C# compiler, which is different than Microsoft's. It's the same C# compiler that's used by Unity and some other external tools. It's running much faster, but it also could be changing some of our information. I'm going to take this 0 and put the :C after it and see if it takes care of it. And then we get our currency. So remember this one, it's in the variables replit.
Could you comment on Fred and see what's the difference?
Sure. And it'll probably work because I swear it's not very consistent. It still works. But I know what you mean. Sometimes it just doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's because we're using a replit virtual machine. And I think when they switched back to using the Mono compiler, they probably didn't get that globalization setting set.
Yeah.
And happened to be using it before they got it fixed. So, and that's what happens to us as the developers. We have weird things like that that can cause us trouble. So I apologize because as an instructor, we try to minimize those kind of things. But yet we don't want to shelter you from them completely, or you won't know what to do when something happens. Real world, so craziness. So I want to go to a replit, but I want somebody else to drive because I don't want to change it. Let me see if I can get this open the way I want. If I change it, then I'll change it forever. I think that I'll come back to that, and let's just create a new replit ourselves so that we can try some additional practicing with our methods. I'm going to go to my home screen, and I'm going to create a replit, and I want it to be C#, and I'm going to name it L04 build a box. Let's try it. See what we can do here. And I'm going to create so for my program here, I am going to be building an output that's just like a box of characters and 5 characters across and 5 up and down to make like a box of stars or something like that. So nothing super fancy. I want to draw something. Let's add some comments here. And let's make sure I'm recording. I heard somebody bloop, 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 and I thought, oh, yeah, I am. I'm going to stop this transcription because I know that you can't figure out what I'm saying. All right, so comments. This is going to be build a box. So I want to use methods to do this because that's what we're working on, figuring out how methods work. So in my program, it'll help me if I label these closing curly braces, the end of my class, and the end of my main. And I'd like to create a method that outputs this little box of stars for me. And last time we created a method, we created it under our main method. Let's put this one above it. It doesn't matter what order they're in, but I'm going to put it above my main. And our method here, we start out with the access mode public, and then we've got to have that keyword static. And if I just keep kind of copying my main, because a method header can be complicated, I'll put that void keyword. And then I'm going to create this method, and I'm going to call it PrintBox. The method is not going to have any input parameters. It's just going to do what it wants to do no matter what. It's not going to take any instruction from anybody else. So I'm going to make my open and close parentheses without anything inside of them. Now let's put our comments again. Public is our access mode. We're going to learn a lot more about that later. Static is required in our main class. It also has a lot deeper meaning that will be more apparent as we go. Now, that void keyword, do you remember what it does? It says that there is nothing returned by this method. The void method doesn't return any info back to anybody. PrintBox then is the name or identifier, the method. And then finally, our open and close parentheses indicate we have no parameters or input to this method. And then we have our open and close parenthesis to show our method body, the beginning and the ending. So my close parenthesis, I can go ahead and label it and say this is the end of PrintBox. So in my PrintBox method, I want to print like a row of stars. It's not going to be super fancy. Like this. And just print. So looks like a for loop is called for, right? Because I want to print a certain number of them across. So let's do a for loop to get started. I'm working with a for loop All of my instructional parameters for my for loop come within parentheses. And the first thing I specify is the variable that I want to use to control this for loop. If this variable doesn't already exist, I'm going to declare it by giving it a data type. I could use a variable that already exists though, and then I wouldn't have to have that int keyword, right? Because it would already exist, so I wouldn't have to have the data type again. And whenever we're using for loops, if you haven't noticed, we use like single letters and variable names like that because they're just kind of temporary for this loop. So let's call our integer, what's something that's good to, easy to see? We'll call it I. Lots of people control their for loops with a variable named I. So whenever I start out my for loop, I can actually specify what I want I's value to be to start out. And I want it to start at 0. And I think I want like about 10 stars. So I want to run this for loop while I is less than 10. And every time my for loop executes, I want to add to I. So I'm going to do I plus plus. So our for loop, just like every other programming language that uses a for loop, we specify beginning value, the test condition for whether to continue executing our loop or not, and finally at the end, the increment that we want to add to I. We could format this a lot of different ways in syntax, so be aware you could see things that look very different. Now, with every time that I changes, I'd like to write out a star. I don't want to have to type console each time. I need to go back up to the top and add my using static system.console. And then I can get away with just saying write or write line. Now, because I'm using this loop, that's a really important point. Do I want to use a write or do I want to use a write line? Think about it, and let's use a write line and see why it's wrong. So every time this loop executes, I want to print out a star. I'm going to change my main method. So here on line 25, instead of doing my hello world code, I'm going to run my PrintBox method. Because it's a method, I have to specify the open and close parentheses to say I don't have any data to pass to that method. We should be able to test this now. Our main method is calling our new PrintBox method, and in our PrintBox method, we're going to write out 10 stars. Oh no, it says .NET run again. Quit it. Go back to the fast one. Not exactly what I wanted. I didn't want each star to be on its own new line. I wanted all the stars to go across. So what should I do?
Do just right, yeah.
Yeah, do just right. Now we should see 10 stars across. They went back to the old slow mode though, so I'm sad. Well, that looks okay. If you notice though, my cursor is sitting there on the same line. I probably want to go down a line after I'm done. So there's a couple of ways I could do that. I could use a write line statement without any parameters, but then I could end up with a blank line. The other thing I could do is write out that \n control code to make it go down to a new line. Realize if I put that up here within the for loop, I would go back to 10, 1 star on 10 lines instead of 10 stars on 1 line. So I'm going to make that \n be written after my for loop is done. So it should write out 10 stars, then go down to the next line, and cursor be sitting there. Ah, that looks good. Nice. So that gives us 10 stars going across. I need to nest that for loop within another, don't I, to be able to get 10 rows of 10 stars. Because right now I just have the 1 row, and that's not really enough. So I'm going to put an outer for loop. I'm going to select all this code first, the code that I have, and I'm going to press Tab to indent it all. And then I'm going to add my outer for loop. My outer for loop, I'll call J. And I can really set this thing up pretty much the same. I want to run this loop while J is less than 10, and I want to add to J each time. And then I want my open curly brace. And I want my closing curly brace to be way down here after I write out that new line statement. Is that all I need?
Yeah, it should run out. Yeah, it should loop.
Should do it. Let's try it. Let's try it to be sure. So it's not a very good box, is it? Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. Everybody else working okay? Got it? Now we could label these closing curly braces. This is the end of our outer for, and inside there is the end of our inner for loop. So that looks great. We've got this thing working now. Everything's good. So what if we wanted to allow our users to also tell us how many rows and columns they wanted instead of us just automatically doing 10?
Input and set that input equal to whatever you're looping as, like in J.
Let's do it. So let's create a new method that can handle this. And this time, we're going to say that we require input. So we want an integer, which would be, I guess we'll call it size. Now I have my open and closing curly braces. And tell me, won't C# give me an error about this, that I have these two methods that are named the same thing? Why not? Because why? Right, because it is an overloaded method. One name, different headers. And you're exactly right that because we asked for that parameter on this one, that makes it different. So C# can tell which one to run. Now, as we do this, we're going to have some duplicate code. And if we were really, wanting to finesse things, we would want to work on all of that. But for where we are, let's copy that code that we have. So I want to get everything inside my PrintBox method, except for its opening and closing curly braces. So I'm going to copy all of that code, our for loop, all the way down to the closing curly brace that ends our for loop. Copy. And I'm going to paste it. And then, like someone said, all we'd have to do here is change our limit. Instead of using 10, we would just use our new size parameter. So easy for us to change. Let's run this new PrintBox method. And first, I think we'll write out a border, right line. Let's do a line or something so that our stars don't get all smushed together. And we can do print box. And let's do 5. Does it work? Try it. Oh, there we go. So, yep, we've got our first one that has 10 stars for 10 rows. And here's our second one where we have 5 stars for 5 rows. Is it giving you an error?
Yeah.
Do you want to share with us? Let me stop mine. Your colors look awesome. Let's see. So what line is it saying we have an error on? You guys help her. Where is that error? What line number are we looking at? You should be able to see it on your screen. 29. Good job. See if that was the perfect. I love the colors. Thank you. Okay. These PrintBox methods worked great. Like I said, I'd like to really think about, could I just use the same one for both things? But that's okay. That's for another day. What I'd like to do now is think about where my output is coming from. When I'm running these methods, my PrintBox methods are sending output from themselves directly to the screen. That's fine. But sometimes we have code that is working like on a server or kind of behind the scenes where we don't necessarily want it to do write lines to the console directly. We want it to build something and send it back to us as a string so that we could decide what to do with it. So let's try a new method here. Let's document these ones we have first. What kind of comments should we put? You guys go ahead and comment up this stuff however you want to so that it's going to be meaningful for you when you look at it later. If you're just getting the hang of for loops, really, kind of analyze those. and be thinking about how that syntax is working. And then when you're ready, let's come back to this empty line right above our main method to create another new method. I want this one to be named something different. We could use our PrintBox method name again and overload it again, but I want you, when you look at this code, to really remember that this is different. So let's do our public static. Now, this method is not going to be a void method. It's going to return a string. The string it returns is going to contain all of the special characters to print out our box, but it's not going to be printed by this method. It's just going to be built. So instead of saying print box, let's call it generate box.
Can you say one more time what the string was meant again?
It's going to be returned from our method. So instead of not returning anything, we're going to put all of the special characters into a string to send back to whoever calls us. Now, when we generate our box, let's try things a little bit differently. We're going to do pretty much the same thing, right? But maybe we want to do things a little different. I'm going to start out saying I'm going to declare an integer named Rose. And I'm going to set one up to be columns. And then we could set up another one to be our limit. And let's make that be 10. We'll use some variables here for all of the different things in our for loops. Now, I don't have to declare these variables before my for loop, but I can. So I want you to see that there is just a little bit of difference. In this for loop, I want to start out setting, this is going to be my inner for loop, so I'm going to be working with the number of columns I want to cross. So I want to start with my columns variable set to 0. I want to execute this loop as long as my columns variable is that less than my limit. And I want to add to my columns variable each time I execute my loop. Now notice that if we compare this to our for loop from before, we're doing pretty much the same thing, but here we're using variables that are already defined or declared, and we're using variables that maybe have more deeper meaning. Now for this, I need a return string. So I really need one more variable. Let me go back and add that in. And I'm just going to call it return string because it's going to contain all of the stuff that I want to return. And I want this to start out as an empty string. So again, in your textbook, in chapter 2, when they were talking about variables, that's one to keep reviewing, just kind of keep going back and kind of scanning through that chapter again, because as you get a deeper understanding of things, you're going to notice things in that chapter that you didn't notice the first time you went through. And this is just one way to declare a variable that has an empty string. You can do it in many, many ways. But now that I've got that empty string variable, I can use it in my for loop. Instead of writing special characters, I want to add them to my string. Return string, and I'm going to use that plus equal. If I use that plus equal shortcut operator, remember if I'm working with numbers, it adds the number after the equal sign to the number before the equal sign. When we're working with strings, it's going to just do the same thing. It's going to add this new string to what we've already built. Let's make this box out of like percent signs or something so that it's different. Now, just like our first implementation, once we're done with our for loop, we need to add \n to our output so that we go to a new line. I'd like to test this, but notice it's not as easy to test as our earlier implementation because it doesn't write things directly to the console. We have to actually do something with that information that is returned before we can tell what kind of data it contains. So in our main, let's change things. I have these beautiful PrintBox and WriteLine statements in my main. I'm going to comment those out so that they don't distract me. And instead, I'm going to do a WriteLine. And what I want to write out is the value that's returned by my generate box method. So since I'm calling that method within my WriteLine statement, whatever it returns is going to get printed. So this way we can test our method. So what we should see, if everything is hunky-dory, after we run our generate box method, we should see 10% signs in a row. Let's run it and see if it works. It's not at me. Let's see. Line 51 is missing my semicolon. I think it's a little faster than it was Monday, but not much. It was so much faster using that other compiler. They just start going back and forth. Looks like there's something else missing, but this time it's complaining about line 42 and line 40. It says this rows variable is never used. Well, that's a warning. I don't care about that one. I care about this kind of pinkish one though, because it's an error. It says line 40, not all code paths return a value. Oh, in our generate box method, we have to actually use our return statement to send our return string back. Now let's try it. Should have gotten rid of all of our problems. Still getting that warning out, but we do see that we have our 10% signs. Everybody work okay?
I have just a function.
Sure. What have you got?
It's like, I don't have any errors, but it's like system.func.
Can you show us?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, we're still seeing it.
Just my guy, this little error there.
Whenever you're calling our generate box down there on line 56,
Yeah.
we're missing the open and close parentheses
Oh, like,
after generate box.
oh, after.
After.
Gotcha.
And so if we don't have those parentheses, C# thinks that's a variable,
That's a variable.
and then it gets confused about it. So that's a really good error for everybody to see because it doesn't really give us a lot of good description.
Good catch on that. Can't believe you can find the errors like that fast.
Oh, just get used to it.
Thank you.
Some days you'll know if the building is killing me because I'll just be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Ask somebody else. Any other problems?
I'm trying to find two errors.
Ah, show us what you got.
Yeah.
Sounds like a curly brace issue if there's a bunch of errors, right? Take over and we'll fix it before our break here. Are you going to show it to us? We're waiting.
I am.
Nope, it's not showing. I don't know. Try again. There it is. So you want to find your first one. Where's the first one? What line is it saying your first one is on? 42. So I'm going to look right above that, look for something that looks wrong that would cause all that trouble. Do you guys see it?
Yeah, I made the same.
What is it? Yep. Now let's try. Oh, that took care of a lot. So line 43 now.
There's a comma.
You can make it a comma if you wanted to have a list of variables, yeah. She put in both loops. We'll do that when we get back from our break. Okay, take a break, 9:20.
They're really easy.
So continuing forward, are we going to get a lot of experience with for loops and such?
Over time, yes.
Yeah, 'cause I was told in my web dev that we were supposed to really already have a good grasp on them in our 120, and we did not get that.
You didn't get that?
I
That's
didn't
fine.
even, so the only way I knew how to use a for loop was for I in variable. That was the only thing I thought you could do. I didn't even know you could put like,
And same bus.
yeah.
So you guys are getting some brand new experience. Yeah, we'll make some comments. I'll go ahead and make some comments unannoyingly about what each of those things do. We need to do that.
You only do it I do it, or that's what you want.
No, you can, in every way, we can use whatever you want.
It goes to.
Well, then you like, if you like.
Yeah, pretty good. There was one of the exercises we had where you were multiplying 1 through 5 against 8, 9, and 10. Did you get to that exercise?
I don't think I did. There was some in the past, like, for those I could figure out how to do them, so I left comments for everyone talking about that.
Yeah, and it's, so you can use whatever, you can declare a variable ahead of time and base your for loop off of that. So like if you have int num1, and then you want to use that instead of I in your for loop, and then you can even continue to use that variable in other things. So like that multiplication exercise, I even put that num1 that I run in my for loop off of in my equation. So every time it increases or decreases the number of the loop, it also changes the equation every time, and then it prints out. So it gets, you can use really.
So we had such a like lack of information in that class. I didn't even know that you could change I thought I was always I, and you could mess with it at all. I didn't know that you could even put anything else.
I think I put it, I was messaging Mark about it the other day.
But going into classes this semester, it is pretty obvious how badly that class went, because we did not use arrays. Arrays are going to be a big thing that we need to know how to use. For loops,
So this might be confusing if you didn't get to that one. But so I declared my variables num1, num2, num3, and then utilized those in my for loop. So then every time it increases, the equation changes.
okay.
So, you know, it's 1 times it. So once you, it's kind of.
I'm hearing something.
So then every time it runs, pulls a number, plugs it into this equation, this loop plugs in the next number, runs it, prints it out, and then kicks back out to this loop, number changes, prints out this way, number changes.
So what does the output to that like really look like? I don't know if you mentioned.
Yeah. So it ended up printing out like this, which this is mobile, so it's all scrunched weird, but so like here's, it gets num1 from the outer loop, and then it kicks to the inner one and does 10, 9, 8, and then kicks back out. And then your for loop number changes. The 2 goes back to the inner loop, 10, 9, 8. So you can utilize those variables wherever you want to. So it's not just for the looping, you can plug it in wherever you want.
Yeah. That's helpful actually. If by changing the parameters on your for loop, you can also change like how long, like you could make it go down to 2 if you changed.
Yeah. So here I was doing, I just wanted 8, 9, and 10. So I started at 10, greater than or equal to 8, and then decrease the number each time it ran. So you can run it in reverse too.
Okay, so you know that either. I need to do plus plus. I just find.
So like if I wanted to multiply 1 through 5 against any number, you just figure out what you want your starting point to be, your ending point, and then whether you need to increase or decrease to get there.
Okay. Alright. Thank you.
And we did in my intro to programming, my teacher was heavy in C#. So I got a little bit. We did
These are C# experts. Everybody's gonna be picking your brain.
So it's interesting once you get into it, figure out all the different things you can do with it. How you can utilize it.
I think the most advanced thing we did in my thing was make a vending machine, I'll say that lightly, that just read inputs from users and outputted it based on like, we didn't even use a switch case, I still haven't used switch cases very much other than that roughly. We just used a butt tons of if thens.
You know what's weird is in the, like out in the real world, select case, the switch case gets so little practice that even really experienced programmers just kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
And it's a really, really efficient way of coding. So
A lot
it's a
better
good one to remember.
than- A lot better than 20 if then
It
else.
is. And it's actually more efficient for the processor
Yeah.
to run too, because the way it sets up things when you do that. I try not to cough into this mic because it gets so amplified, but you can't hear me talk on the videos, but you can hear me cough. Okay, for our for loops, we're going to do a little bit more commenting on this one before we add our outer for loop. So let's go back and do that. I'm in my generate box method, and I want to add some commenting here to my for loop. So kind of like our main method, let's do our for loop syntax. We have three things for a loop that are required: initialization, our test condition, and our increment. So when we're looking at these three things in a C# for loop, false equals 0, semicolon, is our initialization. Setting up what variable we want to use for our loop and what we want its starting value to be. This for loop doesn't say int before the variable name because the variable has already been declared. So I don't have to specify what data type it is. Now, the second part of our for loop, where we've got calls less than limit, semicolon, that's our test condition. So we will keep executing our for loop as long as that test condition is true. And then the last part, where we are incrementing our columns variable, it does not get followed by a semicolon. That is our increment statement. So in that increment statement, I could have a minus if I wanted this for loop to count down. I could have like an actual calculation there if I wanted to. So my for loop gives me a lot of flexibility in how I set things up. Now in my for loop, right now I've got my columns going, but I also need to have the same number of rows printed out. So I want to add that outer for loop. Well, my comments here go with this inner one. So I'm going to indent everything. I'm going to select, actually I lied. I don't want to indent my return statement. So I'm going to select line 55 up to the beginning of my comments and tab to indent all of that.
Isn't the return string plus equals to back goes in, forward slash in? Isn't that not in for loop there?
It is not in our for loop, but we do want it inside of our outer for loop that we're going to add. So you are absolutely right. Good question. Now I want to add that outer for loop, and I'm going to put it above my comments. That's why I indented them too. And then you could put comments yourself for this outer for loop. Now our outer for loop is going to be our number of rows. So again, I'm going to start with 0, and I'm going to execute as long as my number of rows is less than my limit. And every time I execute my loop, I want to increase my number of rows. Right under that, I'm going to have the opening curly brace, and I'm going to have the closing curly brace after I send out the new line control character. So notice how our loop is working. Our inner loop is really doing all the work, right? And then every time our inner loop is done, we go to a new line, and then we restart our outer loop. And then it can run our inner loop to do all that work again. Now, we should be able to run this, and our output from where we call our method in our main method should show all 10 rows, along with 10. Slow pokey. Perfect. So
What is the /n doing?
the /n is doing the line part. So since we changed from a right line to a right, somehow we need to go down to that next line. Let's comment that line out and see what happens if we don't have it. And that's such a good way to figure out what something is doing. Let's try it. If we take that out, how does that smash us? Come on, .NET, quit being so slow. So now I just get a whole big old bunch of % signs that never go to a new line. So our \n was just taking care of going to that new line character. Where's my code? I slid this over and it got stuck. I'll refresh. Okay, now I should be able to put that back in. There it is. Line 57, not be a comment. And then we should have our new line characters back so that all of our % signs are printing on their appropriate line. Now, the big difference between our methods here, let me zoom back out a little bit. Won't let me anymore. Whenever we're looking at these two methods, I want you to really be aware of the big differences. Our generate box method builds a box of % signs in a string variable and returns the string variable to the caller. Now our other methods that did the stars, we didn't have a string variable and we didn't do any return. We just printed those to the console directly. So sometimes your requirements might make you print to the console directly. Sometimes your requirements might make you save a big string like this of characters in a variable to return the whole thing back to the caller. Questions about that? The for loops are definitely something that we'll use often, and you'll get super used to using them. Now I want to show you what would happen if I stuck that data type error.
I ran into that error.
Did you get that error?
Yeah.
And let's run it so you see that error, because it's something that happens to us a lot as new programmers especially. we should see that error that says that that variable is already declared. But of course, it's going to say it in a much less meaningful way. The variable rows is oops, that's our warning still. There it is. Rows cannot be declared because that name is used already. So I have to get rid of my data type there that's declaring it. So I have a question for you. If I leave my generate box method and I go back to my print box method, here I'm looking at my print box method that expects a parameter of the size. I would like, after my for loop is done, to print out the value of j and the value of I. So I'm going to just do a right line statement, kind of like they had us doing a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to say j is j and I is I. And I want this to be an interpolated string, so I'm going to put my $sign before the first double quote. Right now, I'm not calling this method. So I want to go back to my main and uncomment that so that we do call it our print box with a 5. So now when I run, I should get my 5 rows and columns of stars printed, and then my 10 rows and columns of percent signs, because those are the 2 methods that I'm running. So I'm going to try it. To get mad at us. So what's it saying? Let me stretch this out a little bit.
Doesn't exist in the current context.
It doesn't know what J or I are. Hey, you silly, how come you don't know? They're right here. They're right there. They are right there. And what we've got is their scope of I and J is limited to the for loop. Why? Because I declared those variables within the for loop. So once I get out of the for loops, they're not there anymore. So notice a big difference between declaring them above your for loop, they would still exist afterwards, versus declaring them just to be local to that for loop. Your scope is either local or global. We've only used local variables so far. And these variables are super local. They're only available within the for loop, because that's where they're declared. That makes sense? So we can see some things where sometimes we have to be aware of whether we need to use a variable again or not. I'm going to comment out this right line statement because it is causing us trouble, but I want to leave it in there so that you remember that that was something that we needed to be concerned about.
So is it better to do a local or just make a global one? Like,
It kind of just depends on what your situation is. And one thing that we like to think about is if a variable only exists for the short amount of time that it's used, we don't have to worry about some other code somewhere doing something to it and messing it up. So really, yes, the more local we can make our scope, the more standalone our code will be and less impacted by other pieces of code that are outside. But what if we do want a variable that is around for our whole program? What if we would like a global variable? So far, we've only used local variables in C#. Let's create a global one. I'm going to go up to the very top, and here where my class statement is, under its opening curly brace is where I would put definitions for global variables. And we don't refer to them often in C# as global variables, but they are. These variables are class level variables. So they're global within our class. So let's create one. Let's say we're going to have a date time variable that we want to be our current date. So we're going to set it to date time dot now. This is where I wish I had Visual Studio, so I'm not sure if I'm doing that properly. So I'm going to go to a new tab and do C# current date. Just search that. Oh, it looks like I've got it. Date time dot now. I think the only thing is I don't need an open and close parenthesis there.
So is the date time, the very first one, is it specifying that it's gonna be a time, kind of like integer or?
Yes, exactly. Date time is our data type. And it's kind of confusing because it's also the name of a class that we can get stuff from, like what is the date time right now. So I want to run this and make sure I don't have any errors before we try to use that anywhere. Make sure I've got that set up okay. When we're using Visual Studio and visualstudio.net, we're going to get more feedback about these kinds of errors, where with Replit we have to almost run it to see if we've got an error. So we're going to see where we would start losing time if we keep sticking with Replit. It's good for us at first, but then it starts kind of limiting us. Okay, it didn't give me any errors, so that's good. So now that I've got that variable set up, let's use it in our PrintBox method. Let's print out date and time, and I put those in the current date variable. And I'm going to copy this. I want to copy this right line statement, and let's put it in each one of our different methods. So this is kind of a special test for you. You've got to find each of your methods and add this new line of code right under the opening curly brace for that method. So we want to get it in the right place. And then each time we go to print a box, we're going to print out what our current date is. So I put it in my PrintBox method. And finally, I'm going to put it in my GenerateBox method. But I don't really want it there. We'll fix that here in a minute. We want to put that in our return string, don't we? Now let's run this, and we should be able to see our current date and time. We're only calling 2 of our methods to print out symbols. That's okay. We should see our date and time before each of those. Oh, so this error that we're getting repeatedly on our current date thing is really, really kind of hard to follow. Tell me what you gather from that. Doesn't like it. We got that. Our messages, sometimes we have to really be looking for hints And remember that static keyword we've been putting in everything because they're in, all these things are in our main class? Well, when we have a static method, it can only use static data variables. So I'm going to go back up where I have my date time declared, and I'm going to add static.
What does the static? Static means like still. So does that mean like?
It sort of means like still, and I think that's a good way. It's meaning that I'm only going to put one of these in memory. And whenever we're working with our main class, we can only have one of anything because our main class is associated with the console, and each computer only has one console. So when we start getting into creating our own classes, we'll get away from the static things, and then it'll make more sense because we'll have something to compare it to. But let's see if that takes care of it. I wanted to show you so you could see those kind of errors. And now we've got this variable that we're being able to use in all of our different methods because we declared it at the class level. So its scope now is global to our class. We can use it in any of our methods. If we look at our methods, could our PrintBox method use our size variable? No, it doesn't know anything about our size variable. Only this PrintBox method where we have our size variable set as a parameter knows about it. So if we want a variable to be available to us from any method, we need to make it global to our class. Lots of info for you. Now, the one I wanted to look at is 5-1-1. This is one that several people had questions about, and it is in our repetition replit. So I'm going to go find that. And 5-1-1, it's the very last one. Now, when you open yours, you should have some code. I don't have any code. You guys gonna have to help me get started here. It says use a nested loop to produce the following output. Your outer loop could be implemented with this statement. So it gives us a for loop there to try. So let's put that in. You probably already have it. I don't. So I'm going to indent and do for int I equals 1. While I is less than 5, I want to add to I. Our for loop is just like a method. It has a body. It has an open and closed curly brace. So we never put a semicolon at the end of a for loop. That would give us an error. In older versions, it wouldn't give us an error. It just wouldn't work right. Okay. So that's a good start. What do I want to do then in this thing? I've got the for loop that it gave me.
I need to do.
Print this stuff out.
You I usually print out. I did another for loop, but I declared an integer
Inside of it. We should do another for loop inside there, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
So for my inner loop, I want to go down. I want to start with an integer named j, starting at 10. And I want to run this loop until what, j is less than 8. Every time I run this loop, I want to decrease the value of j. So this one definitely required watching that repetition video that's out there in the instructor videos. Make sure that you've got that background to be able to do it properly. Now for this output, once I get to this point, I'm ready to output. And I'll do the interpolated string. I want the value of I. But it looks like that needs to take up a certain number of characters, right? I don't know. Kind of hard to count.
Yeah, the spacing is what I had trouble with.
Yeah, the spacing will get you. So let's think about it here. Every time I print out one of these, it looks like it's about 5. So I'm going to do I, comma 5. We've seen that when we have these output parameters, if we do a colon, it specifies our formatting. But if we do a comma, we can specify how many characters of spaces it's supposed to take up. So let's say we want this to be 5 wide. And then I want the X. And then I want my J variable. And again, I'm going to say that I think it's 5 wide. I'm just guessing. Now, one thing that I did wrong, it says repeat until the left digit becomes 5. Okay, so that's why the 5 was in our for loop. So that looks good. Let's run it.
It's back to the mono.
Do what?
It's back to mono and not the .NET.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it's doing. Work for me, work for me. What are you doing? It's not running.
It's because for the second in the loop, 10 is already. Never mind, that works. That condition is true. Wait, no, isn't.
Is that wrong? Is that backwards?
Yeah, that is.
He's on it. Because I want it to run as long as J is bigger than 8, not smaller than 8. Those decrementing loops, we have to switch that sign. Ah, that's better. Now I got something out. I do want a space after my I value. So let me try to see if that's better. That's getting closer to what they want. Let me bring those instructions back up.
Shouldn't you have a negative 5 for I rather than just 5?
Do what?
Shouldn't you have a negative 5 where the placeholder I is at?
What does that do?
Shouldn't it place, not the J, but the I? Shouldn't that place the spaces on the right-hand side of it?
Yep. So good researching. If we do a minus sign, then our spacing will happen before our variable is printed. If we don't do a minus sign, our spacing will happen after our variable is printed. Very good. So let's run it. I need to put the answer, though, equals I times J.
Well, that looks nice.
Well, it's getting there, but it's still missing some stuff.
Like I use 7, so that way it shows the 8.
Okay.
It also, if it says it needs to stop at 5, you want that to be like,
So that it doesn't.
yeah.
Yeah, or we could
Or
use the
equals
equals.
less.
Great, great. So that's the off by 1 error. And a lot of textbooks talk about those a lot. But an off by 1 error is super common for us as programmers, where we're just off by 1 because we always start counting at 0 or, you know, whatever reason it is, but it's really common. So now I'm doing 1, 2, 3.
Not 4.
Should it be bigger?
Yeah. 'cause
I went off by 1 the wrong direction, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Good job. You guys are thinking good. Now that
So
looks
the-
better.
What's the difference between the -5? Is that mean after, like, after I, you got the -5, that mean the spaces are.
Yeah, it's putting the value of I first and then finishing 5 characters.
okay.
So if our value of I was 2 digits, it would just fill in 3 more spaces, yeah. So that it would be able to line things up.
Right.
Okay, so we're getting there.
Spacing. Yeah, I don't know.
I gotta run it again. Like, what? So everything's looking pretty close. I think that we probably want J's to be a -5 also, don't we? Because it looks like there's some. But then I'm gonna have to move it a space away from the X. That's looking pretty close. Is that what they want? No.
Can you add both directions, a formatting in both directions? So
No,
that
we
would
can't.
comma-
That's a good question. We can't. So what we would have to do is increase the number of spaces before we print out J so that we could accommodate that, or print out more spaces after J. So I think that we were good with it being the positive number.
Put a negative on the I times J.
Yeah.
That would be good. Let's do that. Okay, so if I'm going to do that formatting, I'm going to enclose my formula within parentheses so it doesn't get confused with that formatting. And put our -5 there. That's a good thought.
-5 is right in the number, not. Oh.
That looks closer. Just doing the 5.
J used to be 5.
And we can fiddle with it and get it to be right. And what's annoying is, as a programmer, a lot of times people are like, well, mine worked, except it didn't match that formatting. Well, then it didn't work. That was your requirements. If your output is going to be read by another program as input, you have to match those requirements exactly. And as a developer, you need to be super detail oriented. So these kind of annoying things happen to us. We have to count spaces sometimes. Sometimes we have to get something in the exact right spot. So we could try tabs. We could try all sorts of different things here. One thing that I recommend is copying the output that's required, you know, just like one line of it, and then pasting it into your code so that you can see, you know, exactly what changes need to be made. But what I want to be concerned about here before we run out of time is this new word. That's what's causing a bunch of people trouble. How do I get that stupid word in there when it's just the first one?
How I did it is that if J equals 10, print a new statement.
So where did you put that?
And
After your right line?
yeah, or before it.
Before it?
Yeah, so if J equals 10, write the line that includes the new, else write it without it.
Okay. That sounds like a good solution. So we want to copy our right line.
Then the outer border.
You can, I did mine on the outer.
Did you do it on the outer loop?
Mhm.
That would be
So
fine
you
too.
know, every time it ran it.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of people that did that in the outer loop, they did a write statement and just popped out that word new. So that's a good choice too. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. But it matches up. The important thing here is putting an if statement in this loop. And it seems to be hard conceptually for people to say, I need to put an if statement in that loop because it does different output the first line. Yeah, it's different. So I have to somehow make something different happen. I have to do that in my code. So I need to have an if statement somewhere, whether it's within this inner for loop or after the inner for loop gets done or before the inner for loop begins. All of those places are fine. But somehow we have to compensate for doing something different that first line. Now I'm going to bring up the test and fail all over the place, but we're really, really close.
Mine's acting kind of funny.
Yours is acting weird.
Yeah.
Let's see what you got.
I also on the test.
It doesn't
It's-
like.
Yeah. Their expected output doesn't include 5. It's telling me that it doesn't want.
Oh, it's lying to us.
Yeah, because the instructions say it goes 5.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Because until it hits 5.
Until it hits 5.
Um,
So we did want 5 there. Look at all these changes. Oh my God, do we need to look at yours? You got it?
I think it's just some stupid formatting on my part. Is it? Do you want me to screen share?
Yeah, if you've got trouble.
Errors just with brackets, but I'm not exactly sure.
So after your right line, there's 2, is that 2 closing curly braces?
There's
just
a
one.
curly brace and a.
Get rid of that thing.
Still not in there.
So your if statement, go up to your if statement. We need to finish that.
That's what the issue was. Oh, thank you. Still kind of wonky on.
Oh, it's looking really close though.
Yep.
So there's lots of ways that we could fix this. I'm going to look at these failed results. What kind of ideas do you have for fixing these? As I look at it, I see that my actual output is too far over to the left right off the bat, that I don't have enough spacing after this word new before my 1. And then it looks like my 5 is my column size, might not have been the perfect choice because it's kind of like, I don't know if that's the right size or not.
Could we copy and paste the white spaces on the?
Yes, we could copy and paste the white space, but let's try one thing before we do that. Instead of doing this size for our column, I'm going to change my new to do a tab character. Does it? So \n says go to a new line. \t says insert a tab character. So I'm going to try that. And it has to be outside of my curly braces that have my variable names in them. So I'm going to run like that. I only have my inner right line changed, the one that has the new, because I want to check it before I change my other one. it mad at me. So it looks a little bit better. Let's run that test and see. So do we need both, the comma 5 and the tabs? I'm trying to get my code here where you can see it better. Sorry about that. Now that, I'm going to run my test again. Now I'm just all messed up. Let me count these. My 10 is just perfect. So I think that I should do the -5 on all of them. And you can go in the Replit and copy and paste that formatted output so that you've got yours exactly. That looks pretty good. Let me run my test again. See if that line is at least matching up. No, it's just getting worse. What's going on?
I got to get the exact output, but it's saying I'm missing in lines like 2 and 3, like under new, it says I'm missing stuff there, but it's like the exact output.
Okay, let's steal yours.
Yeah.
Take over and show us.
It's close as I think. But it's just showing some green spaces.
Go ahead and take over and show us what you got.
Yeah, that's how I am right now.
Oh, that looks really good. Can you zoom in a little bit so everybody can see that? Oh, perfect. So fix it up like his, you guys, and we've got the last tab character before the equal sign. And then the answer doesn't have any formatting at all. So what does it say you failed on again?
Underneath like the new on every it's like the words really green. I don't know how
It's just, I mean, it's wanting spaces there for.
Yeah, it's wanting spaces there instead of the tab, but I think you're okay. Scroll on down. Let's just go back to your code and put 4 spaces down in that second right line to accommodate where that new is. Just do 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, and then let's see if that takes care of it. Let everybody copy what you've got there. Beautiful.
One space or 2 between the equal sign and the icons.
Do you have 1 space or 2 before the answer after the equal sign? Just 1?
Just one.
Just 1. So when you see picky formatting like this in the Replit, use that as an opportunity to try experimenting, because there are so many different ways we can format our output in C#. There are a lot of different ways you can try things. And sometimes copying and pasting what's required is just the best way to do it. But sometimes we have to do a little fiddling with things. And one time I worked on a system that was built from an old system. So there was a bunch of invoices generated every day from the mainframe, bills that went out to customers, thousands and thousands of them every day. So the output that was printed to send out to the customers or emailed out to the customers was also passed to a system to save all those invoices in their printed format in a searchable way so that people could just type in an invoice number and bring up an image of that invoice. And at one point, a programmer changed one thing so that instead of an end of line character like that \n kind of control code, that was left out. And they just did the new line manually themselves. Well, that just caused the system that read in all of those invoices to not be able to know what to do with anything. So sometimes a very, very small change to our output can have a really, really huge impact on things that are dependent on it on down the road. So we do have to have that pickiness ability as developers. And on this one, like I said, I think the big thing was adding in the if statement, because our brains are just focused on these for loops. And we're like, what is a for loop? What is that first thing? What is it doing? And it's just so hard to realize that we have to have an if statement in there to make it do something different. So beautiful work. Questions about it? Everybody got it to work? Got that one all beautiful. It'll so good then when I go to grade it, everybody's will be all perfect. Now, I don't usually look at the dates. So if there are any other small changes you want to make to fix things up, you can, but don't put off getting on to doing methods, because that replit is going to be a little bit challenging also. In the methods replit, as you guys get started on it, let me see if I can bring it up here. So if I go to our assignment for the methods replit, I've got to get the invite link because I don't have it. Ah. It's not doing it right.
You have to do the one that says L4 methods.
I just am messing it up. Thank you. Too many links, I tell you, they're such a pain too. All right, what I want to show you is, as you're working through this, and you're going to build this car price app, you're going to be adding different methods, one to prompt for input, one to welcome them to the app, one to do the formulas. You're going to be building on this. So if you get one done, the next one is going to kind of start where you left off. That means if you need a hint on how to do this, you could take a peek at the next one, because it's pretty much going to have the solution to the previous one. So your starting point in each of these car price ones are going to be where you left off in the previous one. So don't forget, you can peek ahead to get an idea of what you're supposed to do on this one. Sometimes people see that empty main method and are a little bit overwhelmed and they don't know how to get started. In this one, you can go to the next assignment and kind of get a little peek. Don't copy and paste it. You know, just look at it and try to get an idea. Oh yeah, I need to do this. I need to do this. So that should help you with that one. And as you're working on it, if you do an annotation, like here in my prompt for input method, if I don't know how to do something, I can highlight this, start thread. Where is this method? And that will send that message to me. Now remember, don't use this for like things that require a 20-minute explanation. Just little quick things. Any questions before we go?
Are we gonna go over tests or are we just gonna do it?
We'll look at it next time. And one thing that you can do, I want you to focus on your methods for this week and not get too worried about our exam that's coming up, because I know sometimes people get too worried about it. But if you're stressing, there is a practice exam that has the same kind of questions as what our exam will have. It's the same question bank.
Oh, nice.
And you should be able to get to that so you can start practicing on it. Now, our hands-on exam, the 4 triangles, will be due a week from today, and we'll be showing each other this application in class. You should find that our build a box kind of application that we did today can help you get started on this one. So that should help. So next time on Monday, we'll talk a little bit, but it'll be mostly lab time for you guys to work on this 4 triangles one so that we can show each other our final product on Wednesday. And this 4 triangles one has a little bit of room for failure. It also has a little bit of room to really shine and really show how you could reduce duplicate code, redundant code. So it'll be fun to watch everybody else's. So be taking a look at that, because we don't want to be putting that one off. I want everybody to have something to show a week from today.
What do you mean by, so like it'd just be a chance to shine? I'm assuming using maybe like a function or something like that.
Yeah, a function that does all sorts of things with. See you later. You guys have a great weekend.
I will probably be in contact with you about some questions still with